The blood-red sunset burned like fire across the horizon as Clint Harrington rode into Granite, Wyoming territory, 1876, his weary Appaloosa kicking up dust along the main street. The smell of trouble lingered in the air as palpably as the smoke from the saloon chimneys. He hadn't planned to stop in this mining town nestled at the foothills of the Wind River Range. But fate had other plans, as did the broken horseshoe that forced him to seek out the local blacksmith before continuing his journey north. Clint had spent the better part of 5 years drifting since the war, taking odd jobs on ranches from Texas to Montana, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. At 30 years old, his weathered face told stories of hardship and solitude, though the intelligent gleam in his blue eyes suggested a man who observed more than he spoke. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm as Clint approached the shop at the edge of town. He dismounted, patting his horse's neck as he surveyed the modest but prosperous-looking settlement. Granite had sprung up following silver strikes in the nearby mountains, and while not as notorious as Deadwood or Tombstone, it had that same restless energy of a place where fortunes could be made or lost overnight. "Be with you in a minute," called the blacksmith without looking up from his work. Clint nodded silently and loosened his horse's saddle while he waited, stretching his own stiff muscles. The sound of raised voices drew his attention to a building across the street. The sign proclaimed it the Granite County Sheriff's Office, and outside stood a man wearing a tarnished silver badge, his hand gripping the arm of a young woman who was trying to pull away. Even from this distance, Clint could see the fear in her eyes. "I told you, Miss Osborne, your father's debt transfers to you now that he's passed," the sheriff was saying, loud enough for his voice to carry. "And I intend to collect one way or another." "My father never borrowed money from you, Sheriff Blackburn," the woman responded, her voice shaking but determined. "Those mining claims are legally mine, and I won't sign them over based on some fabricated debt." Something in her defiance caught Clint's attention. She was slender but not fragile, with chestnut hair pinned back beneath a modest hat. Her dress, while simple, was of good quality, the attire of someone who'd known better days. The sheriff tightened his grip, causing her to wince. "Your father was a drunk and a liar, Willow. Everyone in town knows it. Now, I'm being generous, offering to forgive his debt in exchange for those claims. Don't make me take other measures." Clint's hand drifted toward the revolver on his hip, an old habit from days he'd tried to leave behind. Before he could decide whether to intervene, the woman Willow stomped her heel onto the sheriff's boot with surprising force. The man howled, releasing her arm, and she immediately darted away, nearly colliding with Clint as she rushed past the blacksmith's shop. "Miss, are you all right?" Clint asked, stepping between her and the sheriff's line of sight. She paused, assessing him with intelligent green eyes. "I'm fine, but you'd be wise not to involve yourself with my troubles, stranger." Despite her words, he noticed her trembling hands. "Sheriff giving you a hard time?" He pressed. "Sheriff Blackburn gives everyone a hard time unless they're lining his pockets," she replied bitterly. "Especially women trying to run businesses in his town." From across the street, Blackburn had recovered and was now striding toward them, his face contorted with anger. He was a thick-set man with small, calculating eyes and a mustache that didn't quite hide the cruelty in his mouth. "This doesn't concern you, drifter," the sheriff called out. "Miss Osborne and I have business to conclude." Clint stood his ground, feeling the familiar tension building in his shoulders. "Seems to me the lady doesn't want to conduct any business with you." Blackburn's hand hovered near his holster. "I don't recall asking your opinion. I'm the law in Granite, and I decide what's what. Now step aside." The blacksmith had stopped working, watching the confrontation with wary eyes. Other townsfolk along the street slowed their pace, sensing the brewing conflict. "I'll only be in town long enough to get my horse reshod," Clint said evenly. "But while I'm here, I'd appreciate it if you'd treat the lady with the respect she deserves." Something in his calm delivery made Blackburn pause. The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he took in Clint's worn but well-maintained clothing, the quality of his horse, and most particularly, the way he carried himself like a man who knew how to handle trouble. "You got a name, stranger," Blackburn demanded. Harrington. Clint Harrington. A flicker of recognition crossed the sheriff's face. The Clint Harrington who rode with Colonel Harrison's Rangers in the border disputes. Clint didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Blackburn reassessed the situation, evidently deciding this wasn't the time for a confrontation. Well, Mr. Harrington, enjoy your brief stay in Granite. Just remember whose town you're in. He turned to Willow. We'll finish our discussion later, Miss Osborne. Your father's debts won't disappear overnight. As the sheriff stalked away, Willow let out a shaky breath. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, but I fear you've just made an enemy. Wouldn't be my first, Clint replied with a slight shrug. What's this about mining claims? Willow hesitated, then said, My father died last month. He owned 3 silver claims in the North Ridge. They're finally producing after years of investment, and suddenly Sheriff Blackburn produces a loan document I've never seen before, claiming my father borrowed heavily against the properties. And you don't believe it's genuine? I know it isn't. My father had his faults, but he kept meticulous records. He would never have borrowed from Blackburn. She straightened her shoulders. I'm sorry to have involved you in this, Mr. Harrington. Good day. Before she could leave, the blacksmith called out, Your horse will take a couple hours, mister. Got 3 ahead of you. Clint nodded, then turned back to Willow. Is there somewhere a man might get a decent meal in this town while he waits? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. As it happens, I run a small café just up the street. Osborne's, nothing fancy, but the food is honest. Lead the way, Miss Osborne, he said, taking his horse's reins and falling into step beside her. As they walked, Clint noticed several townspeople watching them with curious or concerned expressions. Willow held her head high, but he could sense her discomfort. Blackburn seems to have the town intimidated, he observed quietly. He's been sheriff for 8 years, she replied. At first he was just strict, but since the silver strikes he's become enterprising. He has interests in several businesses now, and anyone who opposes him tends to encounter difficulties. Such as increased taxes, harassment, inspections, sometimes accidents. She lowered her voice. 3 months ago, a shopkeeper refused to sell his property to one of Blackburn's associates. A week later, his store burned down. The sheriff ruled it an accident, a knocked-over lantern. They reached a modest building with a freshly painted sign reading Osborne's Café. The windows were clean, curtains tied back to allow light to pour in, revealing several tables inside. Only 2 were occupied, but the place was tidy and inviting. It's not much, Willow said with a trace of apology, but it was my mother's dream. After she passed, my father kept it running for her sake, and now it's mine. It looks just fine, Clint assured her, tying his horse to the hitching post outside. Inside, the aroma of fresh bread and stew made his stomach remind him how long it had been since breakfast. Willow showed him to a table by the window, then disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a cup of coffee. The stew will be ready in a few minutes, she said. I hope you don't mind beef and barley. After trail rations, that sounds like a feast. He took a sip of the coffee, strong and hot, just as he liked it. How long have you been running this place on your own? I've helped since I was old enough to carry plates without dropping them, she said with a small smile. But I took over completely when Father began focusing on the mining claims 3 years ago. The smile faded. He was so sure they would pay off eventually. He died just when they finally started producing. Convenient timing for the sheriff to discover this alleged debt, Clint observed. Willow nodded grimly. Exactly. But without proof the document is forged, it's my word against his, and in Granite, the sheriff's word is law. She hesitated, then added more softly, You should be on your way once your horse is ready, Mr. Harrington. Blackburn doesn't forget slights, and he has deputies who are less concerned with appearances than he is. Before Clint could respond, the café door opened, and a young woman rushed in, her expression anxious. Willow, I just heard about what happened with the sheriff. Are you all right? I'm fine, Charlotte, Willow assured her. Mr. Harrington intervened before things escalated. Charlotte turned curious eyes on Clint. She was younger than Willow, perhaps 20 to Willow's 25, with fair hair and a sprinkling of freckles across her nose. Charlotte Miller works with me, Willow explained. Her father runs the general store. Pleased to meet you, Miss Miller, Clint said with a nod. Charlotte lowered her voice. They're saying in town that you stood up to Sheriff Blackburn. Nobody's done that since Mr. Peterson last year, and she stopped abruptly as Willow shot her a warning look. Charlotte, would you check on the stew, please? Willow asked pointedly. After the younger woman disappeared into the kitchen, Clint raised an eyebrow. What happened to Mr. Peterson? Willow sighed. He left town suddenly. There were rumors that he was running from the law back east, and Blackburn claimed to have received a wanted poster. No one ever saw this poster, but Peterson was gone the next day, leaving everything behind. And you don't believe he was a fugitive? Martin Peterson was the most law-abiding man I've ever known, Willow said firmly. He was also organizing merchants to petition the territorial governor about Blackburn's practices. Clint considered this as Charlotte returned with a steaming bowl of stew and a plate of cornbread. The food was simple but flavorful, and he ate with appreciation while mulling over what he'd learned about Granite and its sheriff. I'd like to see those loan documents, he said finally. Willow looked startled. Why? I spent some time as a clerk for a lawyer in Denver before the war, Clint explained. I'm no expert, but I know a bit about legal papers. Hope flickered in her eyes before caution reasserted itself. Blackburn wouldn't show them to you, maybe not. But there might be other ways to examine them. He finished his stew, pushing the empty bowl aside. When is he expecting your answer about the mining claims? He gave me until the end of the week to sign them over or face seizure for debt collection. Her hands twisted in her apron. I've tried to find someone to help, but the town lawyer is Blackburn's cousin, and no one else will stand against him. Clint knew he should pay for his meal and continue on his way once his horse was ready. Getting involved in local disputes was exactly the kind of complication he'd been avoiding for years. Yet something about Willow Osborne's quiet dignity and determination struck a chord in him. I might be able to help, he heard himself saying. But I'll need to know more about these mining claims and your father's records. The hope in her eyes became more pronounced. You would do that. Why? It was a fair question, and one he wasn't entirely sure he could answer. Let's just say I've never much cared for bullies with badges, he replied. Where can I find you later? I close the café at 7. I live in the rooms upstairs. She hesitated. But Mr. Harrington, I can't pay you much for your help. I'm not asking for payment, he assured her. Just information for now. After finishing his meal and leaving payment that included a generous tip, Clint headed back toward the blacksmith. As he walked, he felt eyes on him from various storefronts. Word traveled fast in small towns, and he'd managed to make himself conspicuous within an hour of arriving. The blacksmith, a burly man named Foster, was just finishing with Clint's horse when he arrived. That's a fine animal, the man commented as he worked. Cavalry stock. Texas Mustang with some thoroughbred mixed in, Clint replied. How much do I owe you? Foster named his price, which was fair, then added casually, noticed you had words with Sheriff Blackburn earlier. Just a misunderstanding, Clint said neutrally. The blacksmith snorted. Blackburn doesn't misunderstand. He takes what he wants. He lowered his voice. Miss Osborne is good people. Her daddy, too, before the drink got him after his wife passed, but they've never been a match for the sheriff. Clint mounted his horse, testing the new shoe. Sounds like Blackburn has this town pretty well under his thumb. You could say that. Foster wiped his hands on his apron. Word of advice, stranger. Don't make plans to stay in Granite unless you're willing to play by Blackburn's rules. I appreciate the warning, Clint replied, tipping his hat. Know anywhere a man might find lodging for a night or two? Foster looked surprised. Murphy's boarding house is at the end of the street, clean enough if basic, but I thought you were just passing through. Changed my plans, Clint said simply. Much obliged for the work. As he rode toward the boarding house, he caught sight of the sheriff and two deputies watching him from the steps of the law office. Blackburn's expression was calculating, his eyes cold as winter. Clint nodded politely as he passed, receiving only stony stares in return. Murphy's boarding house proved to be a 2-story wooden structure with a sagging porch but clean windows. The proprietor, a widow with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes, showed him to a small but adequate room after he paid for 2 nights in advance. Meals are extra, Mrs. Murphy informed him crisply. Breakfast at 6, supper at 6:30. No exceptions, no refunds if you miss them. Yes, madam, Clint agreed, setting his saddlebags on the narrow bed. I don't suppose you'd know anything about Sheriff Blackburn and his business dealings. The woman's expression tightened. I don't gossip about the sheriff, Mr. Harrington. Neither should you if you've any sense. She left him alone then, closing the door firmly behind her. Clint spent the next hour cleaning his revolver and rifle not because they needed it, but because the familiar routine helped him think. By the time he finished, he'd decided on his next steps. After stabling his horse at the livery, he made his way back to Osborne's café. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. A few men were emerging from saloons and heading toward boarding houses or homes, but the streets were otherwise quiet. The café was empty of customers when he arrived, with Charlotte wiping down tables while Willow counted the day's earnings behind a small counter. Mr. Harrington, Willow greeted him with surprise. I didn't expect you so early. Thought I'd walk you home, he replied, then realizing how presumptuous that sounded, added, that is, if you're about finished here. A blush colored her cheeks slightly. That's kind of you, we're just closing up. Charlotte cast knowing looks between them as she gathered her things. I can finish the last table tomorrow morning, Willow. Pa will be expecting me home for supper anyway. After the younger woman departed, Willow invited Clint upstairs to her modest apartment above the café. It consisted of a small sitting room with a kitchen area and 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. This was my parents' home, she explained, gesturing for him to sit while she lit lamps against the gathering dusk. It feels too large sometimes, now that I'm alone, but I can't bear to leave it. It's a fine place, Clint said sincerely, removing his hat as he sat in an armchair that showed signs of long use. Now tell me about these mining claims and the alleged debt. Willow retrieved a wooden box from a cabinet and set it on the table between them. These are all my father's papers, his deed to this building, the claims registrations, tax receipts, everything. For the next hour, they pored over the documents. William Osborne had indeed been meticulous in his record-keeping, with every transaction noted and filed chronologically. There were records of small loans from the bank in the early days, all repaid and marked as such. But nowhere was there any mention of borrowing from Sheriff Blackburn or anyone associated with him. The claims are these 3 here, Willow said, pointing to carefully drawn maps. The Silver Lady, the Promise, and Widow's Hope. Father named the last one after mother. And they're producing now? Clint asked, studying the claim boundaries. Yes, finally. The first significant ore came out just 2 weeks before Father died. He was so excited, her voice faltered. The doctor said his heart gave out, but he wasn't sick. Just overworked and perhaps too fond of whiskey in his later years. Clint frowned, a suspicion forming. Did the sheriff show any interest in the claims before they started producing? No, Willow said slowly, understanding dawning. He barely acknowledged my father at all. Then suddenly, after the funeral, he was very concerned about this supposed debt. How convenient, Clint murmured. Have you seen the loan document he claims to have, only from a distance? He wouldn't let me hold it. She described what she could remember: the date, the amount, the general appearance. If we could get a closer look at it, Clint mused. Compare the signature with your father's actual handwriting. But how? Blackburn keeps it locked in his office. Let me think on that, Clint said, closing the box of papers. For now, I'd advise you not to be alone if you can help it. Does Charlotte stay with you sometimes? Willow nodded. She has before. Do you think I'm in danger? I think Blackburn wants those claims, and he's not a man used to being refused, Clint replied honestly. Having someone else around might discourage any unorthodox collection methods. The worry in her eyes told him she understood his meaning. I'll ask Charlotte to stay tomorrow night. But Mr. Harrington, Clint, he corrected gently. Clint, she amended with a small smile. I still don't understand why you're helping me. You were just passing through. He was silent for a moment, considering. I've spent 5 years drifting, Miss Osborne. Seeing injustice and riding past it because it wasn't my fight. Maybe I'm tired of looking the other way. Willow, she offered in return. If I'm to call you Clint, you must call me Willow. Their eyes met in the lamplight, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of a connection neither had anticipated. Clint cleared his throat and stood, reaching for his hat. "I should go. It's getting late." Willow walked him to the door, her expression troubled. "Be careful." "Blackburn has eyes all over town." "I always am," he assured her. "Lock your door behind me." As he made his way back to the boarding house through the darkened streets, Clint replayed their conversation in his mind. There was something about Willow Osborne that had gotten under his skin, her courage, her determination, the quiet strength in her eyes. It had been a long time since he'd allowed himself to care about anyone's problems but his own. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the footsteps behind him. Almost. Years of frontier survival had honed his senses, and he turned casually, as if simply looking at a shopfront, while his right hand moved closer to his holster. Two men were following him, their faces shadowed under their hat brims. Even in the dim light from distant windows, he recognized one as a deputy who'd been standing with Blackburn earlier. Clint continued walking, but altered his course, heading toward the livery stable instead of the boarding house. If there was going to be trouble, he preferred it happen away from others who might get hurt. The footsteps quickened behind him. Clint rounded a corner into the alley beside the stable and waited, his back against the rough wooden wall. He didn't draw his weapon, not yet, but his hand rested on the grip. The men appeared at the mouth of the alley, slowing when they saw him waiting. One was indeed Blackburn's deputy, a wiry man with a thin face and nervous eyes. The other was larger, with a miner's build. "Evening, gentlemen," Clint called softly. "Something I can help you with." The deputy stepped forward. "Sheriff sent us to have a word with you, Harrington." "I'm listening." "Sheriff thinks you might be planning to stay in Granite longer than necessary," the deputy said. "Wanted us to let you know that's not a good idea. Town's got enough drifters causing trouble." "I paid for 2 nights at Murphy's," Clint replied evenly. "After that, I'll decide my own schedule." The larger man spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. "You're being told Mr. Sheriff runs this town. You'd be smart to move along." "I'll take that under advisement." Clint shifted slightly, ready to move if necessary. "Anything else?" "Just this," the deputy said, his hand dropping to his gun. "Stay away from the Osborne woman and her troubles. That's private business between her and the sheriff." Clint's voice hardened. "Miss Osborne can choose who she does business with, so can I." The deputy's face tightened with anger. "You're making a mistake, Harrington." "Wouldn't be my first," Clint replied, his tone deceptively light. "Now, unless you plan to draw that weapon, I suggest you gentlemen enjoy your evening elsewhere." For a tense moment, Clint thought the deputy might actually reach for his gun. But something in Clint's steady gaze must have given the man pause. With a muttered curse, he stepped back. "This is just a friendly warning," he said. "Next time won't be so polite." As the men retreated, Clint remained in the shadows for several minutes, making sure they weren't waiting to follow him again. Only when he was certain they were gone did he make his way back to the boarding house, alert for any further surveillance. Mrs. Murphy was nowhere to be seen when he entered, and the house was quiet. In his room, Clint locked the door and positioned a chair beneath the handle, an old habit from too many nights in questionable establishments. As he stretched out on the bed, still fully clothed except for his boots, he knew sleep would be elusive. Blackburn's warning was clear enough. The sheriff wanted him gone, and the mining claims signed over without interference. The question was how far the man would go to ensure that happened. Morning brought clear skies and the smell of coffee from the boarding house kitchen. Clint joined several other lodgers at the breakfast table, noting the curious glances sent his way. News traveled fast in small towns, and his confrontation with Blackburn had obviously become common knowledge. "Heading out today?" Mrs. Murphy asked as she refilled his coffee cup, her tone suggesting she thought it would be wise. "Not just yet," Clint replied. "I've got some business to attend to first." The woman's lips pursed disapprovingly, but she said nothing more. After breakfast, Clint made his way to the telegraph office. If he was going to help Willow, he needed information and possibly assistance. He sent 2 messages, one to a former ranger colleague now working as a U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne, and another to a lawyer he'd once done work for in Denver. Both inquiries concerned Sheriff Blackburn and any known complaints against him. His next stop was the general store, where he hoped to learn more about the town's dynamics from Charlotte's father. The establishment was typical of frontier businesses, offering everything from foodstuffs to tools, fabric to ammunition. A bell jingled as Clint entered, drawing the attention of a middle-aged man arranging canned goods on a shelf. "Good morning," the shopkeeper greeted him cautiously. "Something I can help you find. Just looking to stock up on a few supplies," Clint replied. "You must be Mr. Miller." The man nodded, his expression wary. "Thomas Miller, and you'd be the stranger who had words with Sheriff Blackburn yesterday." "Word travels fast," Clint observed, examining a display of pocket knives. "Name's Clint Harrington. Charlotte mentioned you," Miller said, relaxing slightly. "Said you stood up for Willow Osborne. Miss Osborne seems capable of standing up for herself," Clint replied. "I just happened to be passing by," Miller snorted softly. "She's got spirit, that one, like her mother before her, but spirit isn't always enough in a place like Granite." He lowered his voice. "Charlotte said you might be looking into Blackburn's claim against William Osborne." "I'm considering it," Clint admitted. "You knew Osborne well." 20 years, man and boy, Miller confirmed. "We came to the territory together back when this was just a camp near the mining sites. William was a good man, honest to a fault. Would he have borrowed money from Blackburn?" Miller's expression darkened. Never. He didn't trust the man, and with good reason. Blackburn came to town about 8 years ago, got himself appointed sheriff, and things changed, slowly at first but steady. "How so?" Clint asked, selecting a knife and some other small items from the shelves. "Taxes went up. Special licenses were suddenly required for certain businesses. Properties changed hands when people couldn't pay." Miller rang up Clint's purchases. William was one of the few who spoke out against it. Even after his wife died and he took to drinking more than was good for him, he never stopped fighting against Blackburn's schemes. "Which is why it's so convenient that he died just when his mind started producing," Clint observed. Miller's eyes widened slightly. "You think, I don't know what to think yet," Clint interrupted, "but I aim to find out." As he paid for his purchases, he added, "I understand Charlotte sometimes stays with Willow. Might be a good idea for her to do that for the next few days, if you don't mind." Miller nodded, understanding the implication. She was planning to anyway. Those girls have been like sisters since they were knee-high to a grasshopper. Leaving the store, Clint decided his next move should be to examine the mining claims themselves. If Blackburn wanted them badly enough to forge documents and threaten a young woman, there must be more to them than appeared on the surface. He was heading toward the livery to collect his horse when a commotion near the sheriff's office caught his attention. A small crowd had gathered, watching as Blackburn and his deputies escorted a handcuffed Willow from the café toward the jail. Clint quickened his pace, his hand instinctively moving toward his revolver before he forced himself to relax. Drawing on a lawman, even a corrupt one, would only make matters worse. "What's happening here?" he called as he approached. Blackburn turned, a smug smile spreading beneath his mustache when he saw Clint. "Official business, Harrington. Miss Osborne here is being detained for questioning about some irregularities in her property taxes." Willow's face was pale but composed, though Clint could see fear in her eyes. "This is ridiculous," she said. "My taxes are paid in full. The receipts are in my father's papers." "Papers can be falsified," Blackburn replied smoothly. "We'll need to investigate thoroughly. Could take days, I'm afraid." Clint recognized the tactic immediately. With the end of the week deadline approaching for signing over the mining claims, Blackburn was ensuring Willow would be unable to seek help or mount a defense. "I'd like to speak with Miss Osborne," Clint stated firmly. "As a friend." "That won't be possible right now," Blackburn said, his smile never wavering. "She's being processed for detention." Several townsfolk had stopped to watch the confrontation, their expressions ranging from concern to resignation. Clint noticed Thomas Miller among them, his face troubled. "On what grounds are you detaining her?" Clint demanded. "Tax questions are civil matters, not criminal." Blackburn's eyes hardened. "When they involve potential fraud, they become criminal, and I don't recall asking for your legal opinion, Harrington." Now step aside before I decide you're interfering with an officer of the law." The deputies tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. Clint knew he was outnumbered and in a legally precarious position. Making a scene would only give Blackburn an excuse to arrest him as well, leaving Willow with no ally at all. He caught her eye, trying to communicate that he wouldn't abandon her. "I'll be available when you're ready to release Miss Osborne," he told Blackburn evenly. "Don't hold your breath," the sheriff replied with a chuckle. "Tax investigations are complicated business." As they led Willow into the jailhouse, Clint remained where he stood, his mind racing through options. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Thomas Miller approached, looking troubled. "This isn't right," he said quietly. "No, it's not," Clint agreed. "Has he pulled this kind of thing before?" Miller nodded grimly. "When Jacob Turner wouldn't sell his property last year, Blackburn arrested his son on trumped-up charges. Held him for 2 weeks. By the time he was released, Turner had signed over the deed." "I need to get into that jail," Clint said, more to himself than Miller. "See what condition she's being kept in, at least." The shopkeeper looked alarmed. "That's dangerous, Harrington." "Blackburn won't hesitate to lock you up too." "I'm counting on it," Clint replied with a grim smile. "But I need to know more first. Can your daughter bring me any information about the jail layout? Who guards it when shifts change?" Miller hesitated, then nodded. "Charlotte knows more than she should about such things. Her young man worked as a deputy briefly last year before Blackburn ran him out of town for being too honest. Have her meet me at the livery in an hour," Clint instructed. "Meanwhile, I need to check those mining claims." He collected his horse from the stable and rode north out of town, following the crude map Willow had shown him the night before. The claims were located about 3 miles from Granite, in rocky terrain that grew increasingly steep as he approached. The Silver Lady claim was marked by a small wooden sign and the remnants of a campsite. Further exploration revealed a narrow mine entrance shored up with timber supports. Clint dismounted and entered cautiously, a small lantern he'd borrowed from the livery illuminating the passage. The tunnel extended about 30 feet before opening into a wider chamber where evidence of recent work was apparent. Tools lay neatly arranged on a flat rock, and a small cart stood ready to transport ore. Clint examined the rock face where digging had occurred, noting the distinctive silver-gray veins running through the stone. He wasn't a mining expert, but even he could see this was a rich deposit. If the other 2 claims were similar, they represented significant wealth, more than enough motivation for a greedy man to commit fraud or worse. Outside again, he visited the other 2 sites, finding similar promising conditions. At the 3rd claim, Widow's Hope, he noticed something interesting. The vein appeared to extend beyond the claim boundary toward unclaimed land to the north. Following it, Clint discovered survey markers indicating someone had already staked the adjacent property. The name burned into the wooden stake read, J. Blackburn. The puzzle pieces began falling into place. If the veins from Osborne's successful claims extended into Blackburn's property, the sheriff stood to make a fortune, but only if he could access and develop them efficiently. Owning all the connected claims would be far more profitable than working a single one. By the time Clint returned to town, his suspicions had solidified into certainty. Blackburn's sudden interest in William Osborne's debts had nothing to do with money owed and everything to do with the silver running beneath the ground. Charlotte was waiting anxiously at the livery when he arrived. The young woman looked frightened but determined. "Mr. Miller said you needed information about the jail," she said without preamble. "That's right," Clint confirmed, dismounting and leading his horse into a stall. "Anything you can tell me about how it's laid out, who guards it when they change shifts?" Charlotte glanced around nervously before speaking in a low voice. "There are 4 cells in the back, 2 deputies on duty during the day, usually just 1 at night. They change at 6 in the evening and 6 in the morning. And Blackburn, does he stay there?" She shook her head. "He has a house on the edge of town, only comes to the office during the day unless there's trouble." "What about keys? Who has access to the cells?" "Blackburn and all the deputies carry keys," she replied. "But at night, the duty deputy keeps them on a hook behind the desk, unless he has to actually use them." Clint nodded, processing this information, Any way to get a message to Willow? Charlotte bit her lip. Maybe. Deputy Evans is on night duty most often. He's not as bad as the others. Sometimes he can be reasoned with, especially if there's money involved. That's helpful, Clint said. One more thing, do you know if the town has a telegraph office? Yes, next to the bank. She hesitated. They say Blackburn reads all the messages coming in and going out. The operator, Jenkins, is his cousin's husband. That explained why Clint hadn't received replies to his morning telegrams. He'd need to find another way to get information and help. Thank you, Charlotte, he said sincerely. Now, I need you to do something else for me. Go to Willow's rooms and gather the box of her father's papers. Hide it somewhere safe, not at your father's store, somewhere Blackburn wouldn't think to look. I can take them to my aunt's farm outside town, Charlotte suggested. No one would think to search there. Perfect. And one more thing, if I don't contact you by tomorrow morning, find a way to get a message to U.S. Marshal Daniel Cooper in Cheyenne. Tell him Clint Harrington needs assistance in Granite regarding Sheriff Blackburn. Charlotte's eyes widened. Are you going to try to free Willow tonight? No, Clint replied grimly. I'm going to get myself arrested. The young woman gasped. That's too dangerous. Blackburn might. It's the only way I can make sure she's safe, Clint interrupted. And the only way I can get close enough to find evidence of what he's really up to. As evening approached, Clint made his preparations. He visited the saloon, making himself conspicuous while nursing a single whiskey for over an hour. Let Blackburn's informants report that he was drinking and potentially becoming a problem. He engaged several locals in conversation, asking pointed questions about the sheriff and his business dealings. By the time he left the saloon, dusk had fallen. The town was quieter now, with most respectable citizens at home for supper and the more boisterous elements not yet emerging for their evening entertainment. Clint made his way deliberately toward the sheriff's office, his footsteps measured and unhurried. The front window glowed with lamplight, and through it, he could see a deputy, presumably Evans, seated at a desk, thumbing through wanted posters with a bored expression. There was no sign of Blackburn or the other deputies. Clint entered without knocking, the door creaking on its hinges. The deputy looked up, his hand instinctively moving toward his holstered revolver before recognition dawned. Harrington, he said warily, Sheriff's not here. I came to see Miss Osborne, Clint replied, closing the door behind him. Evans shook his head. No visitors allowed for prisoners. I just want to make sure she's being treated properly, Clint insisted, moving further into the room. Tax evasion isn't exactly a violent crime. Sheriff's orders, Evans repeated, standing now. You need to leave. Clint made a show of looking around the office, noting the cell keys hanging on a hook exactly where Charlotte had described them. Seems awfully harsh to lock up a young woman over paperwork, he observed. Almost like the sheriff has other motives. Evans' expression tightened. That's enough, Harrington. I won't tell you again to leave. Maybe I should ask the sheriff directly, Clint continued, as if he hadn't heard. Ask him about those mining claims he staked next to Osborne's. Interesting coincidence, wouldn't you say? The deputy's face paled slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Clint pressed. I think everyone in town knows Blackburn is using his badge to line his pockets. They're just too afraid to say it out loud. That's slander against an officer of the law, Evans said, his voice hardening. I could arrest you for that, Clint smiled thinly. Maybe you should. For a moment, the deputy seemed confused by this response, then understanding dawned in his eyes. You want to get arrested, he stated flatly. Why? To make sure Miss Osborne remains unharmed, Clint replied honestly. And maybe to see what else I might learn while I'm here. Evans hesitated, clearly torn. Blackburn won't like this. Blackburn doesn't need to know until morning, Clint suggested. By then, it'll be too late to throw me out. And I'm guessing he'd rather keep me where he can see me than let me wander around town asking questions. The deputy considered this logic, then nodded slowly. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, he ordered. And just so you know, this isn't personal. Never thought it was, Clint replied, complying with the instructions. As the deputy secured his wrists with handcuffs, Clint added, One more thing, Evans. Charlotte Miller mentioned you might be willing to deliver a message to Miss Osborne for proper compensation. Evans stiffened. Charlotte talks too much. $5 says she doesn't, Clint countered. Left inside pocket of my vest. After a moment's hesitation, the deputy reached into Clint's pocket and extracted the money. What's the message? Tell her I've seen the mining claims and I know why Blackburn wants them, Clint instructed. Tell her to hold firm no matter what. Help is coming. Evans pocketed the money with a nod. I'll tell her, but for both your sakes, I hope you know what you're doing, Harrington. The deputy led him through a door at the rear of the office into a short corridor with 4 cells, 2 on each side. 3 were empty. In the 4th, Willow sat on a narrow cot, her back straight and her expression resolute despite the fear in her eyes. She rose quickly when she saw Clint, her surprise evident. Mr. Harrington, what's happened? Our friend here has been talking out of turn about the sheriff, Evans explained before Clint could respond. Thought he might need to cool off overnight. Understanding flickered in Willow's eyes as she looked from the deputy to Clint. I see, she said softly. Evans unlocked the cell opposite Willow's and ushered Clint inside. Weapons stay with me, he said, relieving Clint of his revolver and knife. You'll get them back when you're released. If the sheriff decides to release you. After the deputy had removed the handcuffs and locked the cell door, he hesitated, glancing toward the office to ensure they were still alone. That message you paid for, he said quietly. Consider it delivered. With that, he returned to the front room, leaving Clint and Willow alone in the corridor between their cells. Are you all right? Clint asked immediately, moving to the bars. Have they harmed you? I'm unharmed, she assured him, approaching her own cell door. But Clint, why would you get yourself arrested? Now Blackburn has both of us. That's the idea, he replied with a slight smile. I needed to make sure you were safe, and I needed to be inside to look for evidence. 2 birds, 1 stone. Willow's expression was a mixture of exasperation and gratitude. That's either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, he admitted. But I've visited your father's mining claims today. Blackburn has staked the adjacent property to the north. The silver veins from your claims extend into his land. Her eyes widened with understanding. So that's why he wants them so badly, with all the claims together. He'd control the entire deposit, Clint confirmed, worth far more than any fabricated debt. But how do we prove the loan document is forged? Willow asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Without proof, it's still his word against mine. I've sent for help, Clint assured her. And meanwhile, I plan to find that document. She looked skeptical. It's probably in his office. You can't break in there from a jail cell. No, Clint agreed. But I'm betting Blackburn brings it with him tomorrow when he comes to gloat about having us both locked up, and when he does, you'll what? Grab it through the bars. Despite her situation, Willow couldn't suppress a smile at the absurdity. I'm working on the details, Clint admitted, but I've got until morning to figure it out. They spoke quietly for the next hour, sharing information and developing a plan for the following day. Willow told Clint more about her father and his mining operation, including the names of trusted workers who might testify to the claim's value. Clint explained about the telegrams he'd sent and the help he hoped would arrive from Cheyenne. As night deepened, the conversation turned more personal. Willow spoke of her childhood in Granite, her mother's death from fever 10 years earlier, her father's subsequent decline into grief-stricken drinking. He pulled himself together when the first silver vein was discovered, she recalled, her voice softened by memory. Said mother had guided him to it, that she was still looking out for us even from heaven. That's why he named that claim Widow's Hope. He sounds like a good man, Clint said. He was, Willow confirmed. Not perfect, but good. He taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. She looked at Clint curiously. What about your family? Do they worry about you wandering the frontier alone? Clint's expression grew distant. My parents died in a cholera outbreak when I was 16. I have a sister in St. Louis, married with children. We write occasionally, but our lives are very different now. And no wife waiting somewhere for you to stop wandering? Willow asked, then immediately blushed. Forgive me, that's too personal. No, he said with a small smile. No wife. Never found the right moment or the right woman to settle down with. Their eyes met through the bars, and again Clint felt that connection, stronger now despite their predicament, or perhaps because of it. Evans returned shortly after, informing them it was lights out. As the deputy extinguished all but one lamp at the far end of the corridor, Willow retreated to her cot. "Try to rest," Clint advised her. "Tomorrow will be challenging." "You as well," she replied. "And Clint, thank you. Regardless of how this ends, thank you for believing me." In the dim light, he could just make out her silhouette as she lay down. Clint settled onto his own cot, uncomfortable but functional, his mind continuing to work on their situation even as his body demanded rest. He was awakened before dawn by the sound of the office door opening. Through narrowed eyes, he watched as Evans handed over duty to another deputy, a heavyset man with a perpetually sour expression whom Clint had seen with Blackburn the first day. The new arrival peered down the corridor at the cells. "Both still secure?" he asked Evans. "Neither one's exactly a dangerous criminal," Evans replied with a shrug. "The woman slept most of the night, Harrington too. Sheriff wants to speak to both of them when he gets in," the new deputy said. "Especially Harrington, says he's more trouble than he's worth." Evans cast a glance toward the cells. "You want my advice? Don't rough either of them up without direct orders. Harrington has connections. Mentioned a U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne." The other deputy snorted. "Blackburn's not worried about some marshal. He's got friends in the territorial government." "Still," Evans insisted, "just watch them until the sheriff arrives." After Evans departed, the new deputy settled behind the desk, occasionally casting suspicious glances toward the cells. Clint remained motionless, feigning sleep while listening to every sound from the office. Around 8 o'clock, the front door opened again, and Clint recognized Blackburn's voice. "Both still here?" "Yes, sir," the deputy confirmed. "No trouble overnight." "Good," the sheriff replied. "I want to talk to Harrington first, alone." Footsteps approached the cells, and Clint sat up slowly, as if just awakening. Across the corridor, he could see Willow was already awake, watching anxiously. Blackburn appeared, looking smugly satisfied as he surveyed his prisoners. "Well, well," he drawled. "Clint Harrington, locked up like a common troublemaker. How the mighty have fallen." "Morning, Sheriff," Clint replied calmly. "Sleep well." Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "Don't get comfortable, Harrington. I haven't decided yet whether to run you out of town or keep you locked up until you rot." "Those are my only options. What happened to a fair trial?" the sheriff chuckled. "Trial for what? Disturbing the peace, interfering with official business, hardly worth the trouble." He glanced toward Willow's cell. "Besides, by the end of the week, your reason for staying in Granite will have concluded her business with me, one way or another." "You mean she'll have signed over her rightful property based on a forged loan document?" Clint said bluntly. Blackburn's face darkened. "Careful, Harrington. Accusing an officer of the law of forgery is serious business." "So is fraud," Clint countered. "And I'd bet the territorial governor would be very interested in how you've been acquiring property in Granite. Especially mining claims adjacent to ones you're trying to seize through questionable means." For a moment, genuine surprise flashed in Blackburn's eyes before he masked it with anger. "You've been busy for a man just passing through," he observed. "Too busy for your own good." "I've always been curious by nature," Clint replied. "And I'm especially curious about how a town sheriff affords to stake mining claims. Must be a well-paying position." Blackburn stepped closer to the cell bars, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully, Harrington. This doesn't concern you. Ride out today, and what happens between me and the Osborne woman stays in Granite. Interfere further, and you'll regret it." "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" "Consider it friendly advice," Blackburn replied, his tone anything but friendly. "I've dealt with troublemakers before. Some left town willingly, others left, differently. Like William Osborne," Clint suggested quietly, the sheriff's expression hardened to Granite. "Osborne drank himself to death. Everyone in town knows that. Do they, or do they just know better than to question what you tell them?" For a long moment, Blackburn stared at Clint, his eyes cold with calculation. Then his composure returned and he smiled thinly. "You know, Harrington, I think I'll keep you here for a while, let you cool off and reconsider your position. Meanwhile, Miss Osborne and I have matters to discuss." He moved across the corridor to Willow's cell. "Good morning, Miss Osborne. I trust you've had time to consider your situation." Willow stood straight, her chin lifted defiantly. "I have, Sheriff. My answer remains the same. I won't sign over my father's claims based on a fraudulent debt." Such stubbornness, Blackburn sighed theatrically. And here I brought the papers, thinking you might have come to your senses. He patted his breast pocket. The loan document is quite clear. Your father borrowed a substantial sum, using the claims as collateral. You can examine it yourself if you doubt me. This was exactly what Clint had been hoping for. Now he needed to get a close look at that document. I'd like to see it, Willow said firmly. If my father truly owed this debt, show me his signature. Blackburn hesitated, then shrugged. Why not? It changes nothing. He withdrew a folded paper from his pocket and held it up. $5,000 with the Silver Lady Promise and Widow's Hope claims listed as security, signed by William Osborne last year, witnessed by my deputy. Let me see, Willow insisted, reaching through the bars. The sheriff held the document just beyond her grasp. You can look, but not touch. I know how easily papers can be damaged. As Willow strained to see the document, Clint observed Blackburn carefully. The sheriff was focusing entirely on taunting Willow, momentarily forgetting his other prisoner. It was the opportunity Clint had been waiting for. Sheriff, he called suddenly, loudly enough to make Blackburn turn. I believe I've reconsidered my position. Blackburn looked suspicious but couldn't resist the apparent capitulation. Have you now decided jail doesn't suit you after all? Something like that, Clint agreed. If I were to leave town today, what assurance do I have that Miss Osborne will be treated fairly? The sheriff approached Clint's cell again, the document still in his hand. You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Harrington. Maybe not, Clint acknowledged. But I do have friends who would be interested to know if anything happened to me in your jail. That U.S. Marshal I mentioned, he's expecting to hear from me by tomorrow. Blackburn's confidence wavered slightly. You're bluffing, am I? Clint challenged. Care to risk your comfortable arrangement here to find out? As the sheriff leaned closer to the bars, Clint made his move. With lightning speed born of years of frontier survival, he thrust his arm through the bars and grabbed Blackburn's wrist, yanking him forward until his face slammed against the metal. Simultaneously, his other hand shot through and snatched the document from the sheriff's grasp. Blackburn howled in pain and rage, blood streaming from his nose. Jenkins, he bellowed. Get in here, the deputy rushed in, gun drawn. Let him go, Harrington, or I'll shoot. Clint released Blackburn, backing away from the bars with the document clutched in his hand. Just wanted a closer look at this loan agreement, he said mildly. Interesting reading. Blackburn was furious, pressing a handkerchief to his bleeding nose. Get that paper back, you fool, he ordered Jenkins. The deputy approached the cell cautiously. Hand it over, Harrington. I don't think so, Clint replied, quickly scanning the document. Not when it proves the sheriff is a fraud and a forger. What are you talking about? Jenkins demanded. Clint held up the paper. This loan agreement is dated May 15 of last year. But look at the form itself, the territorial seal in the corner. This is a new form that wasn't issued until January of this year. No legitimate document from last May would be on this paper. Willow gasped from across the corridor. He's right. My father handled legal papers for his mining claims. The territorial government changed the forms after the new year. Blackburn's face contorted with rage. Shut up, both of you. Jenkins, get that paper now. But the deputy hesitated, looking uncertainly between the sheriff and the document in Clint's hand. Is that true about the forms, Sheriff? Don't be an idiot, Blackburn snapped. He's lying to save his skin. Get the paper. As Jenkins reached for the keys to unlock Clint's cell, the front door of the office burst open. Heavy footsteps approached and a commanding voice called out, That's far enough, deputy. A tall man in a dusty coat appeared in the doorway to the cells, a U.S. Marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. Behind him stood Thomas Miller and Charlotte. Marshal Cooper, Clint greeted him with relief. Your timing is excellent, always was, Cooper replied dryly. Got your telegraph yesterday, rode through the night. He turned his attention to Blackburn. Sheriff, I'm here investigating complaints about irregular law enforcement in Granite. Seems I've arrived just in time. Blackburn straightened, attempting to reassert his authority despite his bloodied face. This is local business, Marshal. You have no jurisdiction here. Federal fraud and corruption involving territorial documents falls squarely within my jurisdiction, Cooper countered. as does the illegal detention of citizens without due process. He nodded toward the document in Clint's hand. That the loan agreement I've heard about, it is, Clint confirmed, forged on a form that didn't exist when it was supposedly signed. Cooper held out his hand to Jenkins. The cell keys, deputy. Now. The deputy looked to Blackburn, who glared furiously. Don't you dare, Jenkins. But Cooper's steady gaze and the unmistakable authority in his voice proved the stronger influence. Jenkins slowly handed over the keys. Sheriff Blackburn, you're relieved of duty pending investigation, Cooper announced. I suggest you surrender your weapon. Blackburn's hand moved toward his holster. For a tense moment, Clint thought he might actually draw against a federal marshal. Then, with a curse, he unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop to the floor. This isn't over, he growled. I have friends in the territorial government, so I've heard, Cooper replied impassively. You can explain that to the judge too. Within minutes, the situation had reversed completely. Clint and Willow were free, while Blackburn occupied one of the cells, Jenkins another. Cooper dispatched Miller to locate Evans and the other deputy, instructing Charlotte to spread word in town that a federal marshal had arrived to address complaints against the sheriff. In the office, Cooper examined the forged loan document carefully. Clear case of fraud, he confirmed, and I suspect when we dig deeper, we'll find more. The telegraph operator confessed this morning that he's been intercepting official communications on Blackburn's orders. That explains why I didn't hear back from my contacts in Denver, Clint observed. Cooper nodded. He gave me your telegrams when I identified myself. Smart thinking, sending for help through the Miller girl instead. While they talked, Willow had been examining her father's papers, which Charlotte had brought from her aunt's farm. Here, she said suddenly, holding up a document. This is my father's actual signature. You can see it's nothing like the one on Blackburn's forgery. Cooper compared the two. That'll help the case. I'll need statements from both of you and anyone else willing to testify about Blackburn's activities. What about the mining claims? Willow asked anxiously. Are they secure now? They're your rightful property, Cooper assured her. Blackburn's attempt to seize them through fraud is documented evidence against him. No judge would honor his claim. As Cooper continued organizing the investigation, deputizing Miller temporarily to help maintain order, Clint led Willow outside. The morning sun was bright, the town unusually quiet as word spread about Blackburn's arrest. I can hardly believe it's over, Willow said, blinking in the sunlight, after months of his threats and intimidation. It's not quite over, Clint cautioned. There will be a trial, testimonies. Blackburn does have connections, as he claimed. But we have proof now, she pointed out, and a federal marshal investigating. That makes all the difference. Clint nodded, then asked the question that had been growing in his mind since he'd first intervened on her behalf 2 days earlier. What will you do now? With the mining claims, I mean. Willow looked thoughtful. Operate them, I suppose. My father always believed in those mines. It would dishonor his memory to sell them now that they're finally producing. Running mines is complicated business, Clint observed. Dangerous, too. I'm aware, she replied with a small smile, but I've never shied away from challenges. I've been managing the café alone for years. The mines will simply be a larger challenge. They walked slowly toward Osborne's café, which had remained closed during Willow's detention. Charlotte had already gone ahead to open it, promising coffee and breakfast for everyone. And what about you, Clint Harrington? Willow asked as they reached the café door. Will you continue drifting now that your good deed in Granite is done? The question caught him off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. In the brief time he'd known Willow Osborne, she'd awakened something he'd thought long buried a desire for connection, for purpose beyond mere survival. I haven't decided, he admitted. My horse is still at the livery, ready to travel, but, she prompted when he hesitated. But I find myself less inclined to ride on than I expected to be, he finished. Their eyes met, and this time there was no mistaking the connection between them, a bond forged in adversity but promising something much richer. Mining operations do require security, Willow suggested, a hint of color rising in her cheeks. Especially successful ones. It would be a steady position for someone with experience handling difficult situations. "Is that a job offer, Miss Osborne?" Clint asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "Perhaps," she replied. "Or perhaps simply an observation that Granite might benefit from having a man of integrity remain in town. The café could use help too, with business likely to increase as the mines develop." Clint considered her words, suddenly seeing possibilities where before he'd only seen the next trail to follow. "I might be persuaded to stay," he said slowly, "for the right reasons." "And what might those reasons be?" Willow asked, her voice soft but steady. Instead of answering with words, Clint gently took her hand in his. The simple gesture conveyed what he wasn't yet ready to say aloud, that in defending her against Blackburn, he'd found something worth risking everything for. Something, perhaps, worth staying for. "We could discuss those reasons," he suggested, "over breakfast. I hear the cafe in town serves honest food." Willow's smile brightened her entire face. "I've heard the same," she agreed, "and the proprietress is said to be open to new possibilities." Together they entered the cafe, where Charlotte was already bustling about preparing for customers, and Marshall Cooper was deep in conversation with several townspeople eager to share information about Blackburn's activities. As they found a quiet table in the corner, Clint realized that for the first time in years, the pull of the trail ahead had been replaced by the promise of what might grow in this unexpected place with this remarkable woman. He'd risked his life for a stranger and found, perhaps, a future he'd never imagined possible. The weeks that followed Blackburn's arrest transformed Granite. With Cooper's investigation revealing the full extent of the sheriff's corruption, many townspeople came forward with their own accounts of intimidation and fraud. The territorial governor, eager to distance himself from the scandal, appointed a respected retired judge as interim sheriff until a proper election could be held. Willow's mining claims flourished under her management. She hired experienced miners who had respected her father, and with Clint's guidance on security matters, established a reputation for fair dealing and steady production. The café became a hub for the revitalized community, with Charlotte taking on more responsibility as Willow divided her time between the business in town and the mines. For Clint, the transition from drifter to settled man came more naturally than he'd expected. His experience and quiet authority earned him respect among the miners and townspeople alike. But it was his deepening relationship with Willow that truly anchored him to Granite. Their courtship progressed steadily through summer and into autumn. They worked side by side during the day, she managing accounts and operations, he overseeing security and transportation of the silver ore. Evenings were spent at the café, planning the next day's work, or sometimes simply enjoying each other's company on the porch of what had been her father's house and was now their shared home. Marshall Cooper returned in September for Blackburn's preliminary hearing. The evidence against the former sheriff was overwhelming, and he was bound over for trial in Cheyenne. Before departing, Cooper took Clint aside. "You seem to have found your place," he observed. "Suits you better than drifting." Clint nodded, looking across the street where Willow was arranging fresh curtains in the cafe windows. "I was running from ghosts," he admitted. "Didn't realize it until I found a reason to stand still." "She's a fine woman," Cooper said. "Reminds me of my own wife, backbone of steel under all that grace." "That she is," Clint agreed. "Which is why I'm asking her to marry me tonight." Cooper clapped him on the shoulder. "About time, Harrington. I'd be pleased to stand as witness when the time comes if you'll have me." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Clint assured him. That evening, as the sunset painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, much like the evening he'd first ridden into town, Clint asked Willow to walk with him to the ridge overlooking Granite. "It's changed so much in just a few months," she observed, looking down at the bustling town. New buildings were going up, the silver production having attracted legitimate businesses and families. "Father would be proud to see it." "He'd be prouder of you," Clint said, taking her hand. "Most women would have sold those claims and moved on after what happened. You stayed and built something lasting." Willow squeezed his hand. "I had help. I still don't know what made you risk everything for a woman you'd just met that day." "I ask myself the same question sometimes," he admitted with a smile. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was just time for me to stop running. He turned to face her fully. All I know is that defending you from Blackburn was the best decision I ever made. As the last light of day gilded her face, Clint knelt before her, withdrawing a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside gleamed a silver ring with a modest diamond, the first production from the widow's hope mine, set by a jeweler in Cheyenne. "Willow Osborne," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I rode into Granite looking for nothing but a repaired horseshoe. Instead, I found you brave, determined, and stronger than you know. I can't imagine riding away from you now or ever. Will you marry me?" Tears brightened her green eyes as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then, finding her voice, she whispered, "Yes, Clint Harrington. Yes, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to embrace her, Clint felt a sense of homecoming unlike any he'd known before. He had defended her from danger and risked everything for a woman he'd just met. In return, she had given him what years of wandering had never provided: a place to belong, a purpose beyond survival, and love to light the way forward. Their wedding took place in October, with the aspen trees blazing gold against the blue Wyoming sky. Marshal Cooper stood as Clint's best man, while Charlotte served as Willow's maid of honor. The entire town turned out for the celebration, held in the newly constructed town hall that replaced the building Blackburn had once used to intimidate the citizens of Granite. In November, news arrived that Blackburn had been convicted on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and abuse of office. He would spend the next 15 years in the territorial prison. The announcement brought final closure to the shadow that had hung over the town for so long. As winter settled over the mountains, bringing with it the quieter rhythms of the season, Clint and Willow found themselves before the fireplace in their home, discussing plans for the coming year. "The eastern claim will be fully operational by spring," Willow noted, reviewing the ledger in her lap. "And the café profits have never been better, even with Charlotte taking a larger share as partner." "The town's growing faster than anyone expected," Clint observed. Cooper mentioned the railroad might consider a spur line to Granite if the silver production continues to increase. Willow set aside her ledger, a secretive smile playing at her lips. "We might need to adjust our plans somewhat." "Oh," Clint looked up from the security report he'd been reading. "Problems with the new equipment, not the equipment, no." Her smile widened. "But we might want to consider building that larger house we've discussed. The doctor confirmed it this morning. We're going to need the extra room by summer." For a moment, Clint stared at her uncomprehendingly. Then understanding dawned, and his expression transformed from confusion to wonder. "You mean, yes," she confirmed, her eyes shining with happiness. "We're going to have a child, Clint, our child." In 3 quick strides, he crossed the room and gathered her into his arms, lifting her in a joyful embrace. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." As they stood together in the warmth of their home, with snow falling gently outside the windows and the promise of new life growing between them, Clint reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him here. A broken horseshoe, a chance encounter with a sheriff bullying a young woman, a decision to stand up for what was right. These simple moments had changed the course of his life forever. The drifter who had ridden into Granite expecting nothing more than a brief stop on an endless journey had found instead the greatest treasure a man could hope for: love, purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes, risking everything for a stranger could lead to gaining everything that truly matters. 5 years later, Clint Harrington stood on the porch of the large, comfortable house he and Willow had built on the edge of Granite, watching his 4-year-old son William and 2-year-old daughter Catherine playing in the spring sunshine. Behind him, Willow emerged from the house, her hand resting on the slight swell of her belly where their 3rd child was growing. "The children from town are coming this afternoon for their reading lesson," she reminded him, slipping her arm through his. "Charlotte's bringing her twins as well." Clint nodded, smiling as he watched his son carefully showing his sister how to build a small fort from sticks. "Town council meeting's been moved to tomorrow," he informed her. "Cooper's arriving tonight to discuss the new courthouse plans." Since being elected mayor of Granite 2 years earlier, Clint had worked tirelessly alongside Willow to build the town into a model of frontier progress. The mining operations continued to prosper, but they had diversified into cattle as well, ensuring the community's future beyond the eventual depletion of the silver veins. "Do you ever regret it?" Willow asked suddenly, looking up at him. "Staying here, taking on all these responsibilities, when you could have kept your freedom on the trail." Clint turned to her, taking in the face he'd woken to every morning for 5 years still beautiful, perhaps more so now with the confidence of motherhood and success enhancing her natural grace. "Not for a single moment," he assured her, drawing her close. "What I thought was freedom was just emptiness in disguise. This you, our children, our home, our town, this is true freedom." As they stood together, watching their children play in the yard of the home they had built, with the town they had helped transform spread out below them, Clint Harrington knew with absolute certainty that the greatest risk he'd ever taken defending a woman he'd just met from a corrupt sheriff had yielded the greatest reward any man could ask for. A life filled with purpose, community, and love that grew stronger with each passing day.